If you think acid reflux is caused by too much stomach acid, you may be missing the bigger picture. And in this video, I'm going to explain to you why most of what you've heard about acid reflux is actually wrong. Because acid reflux isn't just about acid. It's about movement. It's about pressure. And in many cases, it's about a digestive system that just isn't functioning properly. Hi. I'm Dr. Kevin Passero, Chief Science Officer for Durable and practicing naturopathic doctor. I've been working with patients for over 20 years and helping them to naturally solve acid reflux problems at the root cause. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the key aspects of acid reflux, the foundations related to naming and terms that are used around acid reflux, to why stomach acid is actually so important, and also some key mechanisms that trigger acid reflux, because once we identify those, we can actually start to fix the problem at its root cause. So let's get started. First, let's clear up some nomenclature issues because there's a lot of terms that get thrown around in regards to acid reflux. So we have things like heartburn, acid reflux, and GERD. So heartburn is simply just a name attached to the symptoms. Heartburn is what people experience, right? Acid is touching the esophagus, causing burning sensation, and they feel it in their chest somewhere around their heart. Now, some people actually don't have heartburn, but do have reflux. They have something called silent reflux, which is another separate condition, but responds the same way that burning stuff does. So if you've been told you have silent reflux, you want to stay tuned because everything we're going to talk about in this video series applies also to you. Then we have acid reflux, which is just a description of the mechanism that causes the heartburn. Acid reflux is just what occurs, just what it says. The acid is refluxing out of the stomach up into the esophagus and causing the problem. And then, of course, we have the term that most people have heard of, which is GERD, which stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease, which is basically when heartburn or acid reflux becomes chronic. So if you're somebody that couple times a year you eat the wrong foods or overindulge and you get some burning sensation and some acid reflux or heartburn after you eat, that's not usually a big deal. But if you're someone where it's happening to them multiple times a week or every day, then it's chronic and you're classified as somebody that has GERD. So those are the three key terms. Heartburn is the symptom, reflux is the process, and GERD is when it becomes chronic. So I hope that's helpful. Now let's talk about some mechanisms, right? Because reflux isn't just about how much acid you have. It's actually about where that acid is going. You see, your stomach is designed to handle quite a bit of acid. The stomach contents pH is around a 1 or a 2. Now this is mind-blowing because on the pH scale, that's as acidic as it gets. Something that has an acidity level of a 1 or a 2 could be strong enough to melt a metal nail. So how is it that our stomach isn't constantly just disintegrating and the contents of our stomach just leaking out into our abdomen? That's because our stomach has very highly specialized cells that produce very specific compounds that neutralize that stomach acid before it even touches the lining of the stomach wall. It creates a neutralizing buffer. Now, the stomach is equipped for this, but guess what's not equipped for this? Your esophagus. So anytime any stomach acid leaves the stomach and enters the esophagus, you get that terrible burning sensation because the esophagus is not equipped like the stomach is with those specialized cells to handle that. Now, as we're going to talk about why in the world would the body be designed to have all of this crazy acid in the stomach if it's causing all this pain, we're going to talk about that in the next segment, the key aspects of why stomach acid is so important. So stay tuned for that. So when it belongs in the stomach, it's just fine. When it gets out of the stomach is when it causes the problem. So the real question isn't, do I have too much acid? It's why is the acid moving in the wrong direction? That is the key, and that is what we're going to be breaking down. So first let's talk about why stomach acid is so important. These are key components as to why our body was designed in this way, and it relates specifically to aspects of things like protein digestion, vitamin and mineral absorption, immune function, and downstream digestive function. And we're going to cover these in more detail in this segment. So first, let's talk about protein digestion. Stomach acid plays a super important role in breaking down proteins. Now, true protein digestion happens more in the small intestine from the pancreatic enzymes, but there's a key process that stomach acid provides in the stomach when it comes to protein digestion. You see, proteins are just long strings of amino acids. And what happens as the body links those amino acids together, they start to fold on top of each other. And when they fold, they create bonds. Think of it like this. If you took a small piece of yarn and attached it on one side to something and started twisting the yarn on the other side, it would start to make these little balls. And if you kept twisting, that big string of yarn would end up as one twisted ball. That is a perfect analogy of how amino acids end up folding into protein. And what stomach acid does is stomach acid breaks the bonds between those areas where it folded on itself so that that string or that amino acid chain can end up straight. So stomach acid is sort of like unwinding that yarn so that ball becomes a nice straight string. And then when that amino acid string passes into the small intestine, the pancreatic enzymes are able then to cut it up into its smaller amino acid counterparts. So if you have low stomach acidity, you can't denature the proteins that you eat in your stomach, and therefore they're not properly prepared for digestion in the small intestine, which means that you don't get the amino acid breakdown and absorption that you should. And listen, folks, every single cell in your body relies on amino acids for regeneration. In fact, it's beyond cells. Amino acids make up our proteins, they make up our connective tissue, but amino acids play a key role in things like our neurotransmitters and a key role in our detoxification process. If you're not denaturing your proteins and easily able to break them down due to lack of stomach acid, you compromise your ability to absorb one of the most fundamental key building blocks of all cellular health, your amino acids. So that is a major important part of it. Now, to carry on the aspect of nutrient absorption and digestion, stomach acid plays a key role in helping our bodies absorb vitamins and minerals. Now, minerals specifically, because stomach acid does something to minerals, it ionizes them, basically changes the electrical state of minerals like calcium and iron and magnesium. And if those minerals aren't ionized in the stomach via high stomach acidity, they can't get absorbed in the small intestine. So if you can't ionize minerals, you can't absorb them. And we know from looking at research, people with low stomach acidity end up with very low levels of these nutrients. And medications that are prescribed that actually suppress stomach acidity, we know in those people they end up with mineral deficiencies of these specific minerals and oftentimes have to supplement them as a result of that sort of artificial low stomach acidity. So minerals are key to so many different biological processes, and if we don't ionize them, we can't absorb them. And there's a few key vitamins, specifically B12, where you need stomach acidity to cleave that B12 off of its carrier protein so that it can then get absorbed and attached to something called intrinsic factor and get absorbed in the small intestine. So low stomach acidity can have a major impact on the ability of your body to absorb minerals and vitamins, which are key components to establishing overall cellular health. Now, after that, we want to talk about our immunity and our immune function, because stomach acidity is sort of like a natural layer of immune defense, because let's face it, not many things or microbes can survive in a pH of 1 or 2. So we know through very extensive research and studies that if you suppress stomach acidity, as it would make sense, you increase the risk of certain types of gastrointestinal infections. We know for sure something called C. difficile, which is oftentimes a hospital-acquired infection or something that happens when people take antibiotics and they throw off their gut microbiome, can be higher risk of that if your stomach acidity is low, because that stomach acidity is part of our barrier to killing off pathogens. And it's not just bacteria like C. difficile, it also translates to protozoa like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, in addition to other parasitic infections. So that makes a lot of sense. It's an immune barrier because not many things can survive in something that has a pH of 1 or 2. Now, a little bit more counterintuitive is that stomach acidity and immune function also relates to our respiratory system. And we've learned this by studying patients in hospital settings. People who are admitted to hospitals on medications that suppress stomach acidity have a much higher rate of pneumonia than patients who are admitted not on acid blocking medication. And it makes sense. When you're in a hospital, usually you're not very ambulatory, which means you're laying down in a bed. Gravity is kind of working against you, not keeping everything down, and that bacteria somehow can actually mitigate its way up through the trachea and the esophagus to actually contribute to some refluxing and problems that can create lung infections. So as we wouldn't normally think about stomach acidity and our respiratory system, they are actually linked a little bit more than you may realize. And stomach acid is a major important factor when it comes to supporting our immune system. Now, lastly, we're going to talk about how that stomach acidity plays a major role in the rest of the digestive function, right? And the rest of the digestive process. And this has to do with the downstream effects of not breaking things down properly. And we talked about that with the protein digestion. So if for some reason that protein is not properly denatured in the stomach and can't be properly broken down into amino acids in the small intestine, you get these undigested protein structures moving through the digestive system into the colon. And when they move into the colon, our good natural bacteria, those good gut bugs that everybody talks about, don't do a good job feeding off of undigested protein. But there are non-beneficial bacteria that can actually break it down. So what we end up doing is providing a preferred fuel source for the kinds of bacteria that actually make us sick. And we starve out the good bacteria that we would normally want to feed when we break things down properly. And that can create a lot of bloating and a lot of gut dysbiosis, which we know is associated with a whole host of things, including obesity and blood sugar problems, even mood disorders and brain function, skin health. We have to have a good, healthy gut microbiome. And that starts with properly breaking things down higher up in the digestive system, like in the stomach, as we've been discussing. Now, it also has downstream effects on the rest of the digestive system because stomach acidity regulates the key valves that regulate passage of food out of our stomach and into our small intestine. We have something called the pyloric sphincter, which is at the bottom of the stomach, that opens to allow stomach contents to move from the stomach into the small intestine to flow down that sort of gradient of digestion. And low stomach acidity actually prevents that valve from opening. And so if that valve doesn't open, the stomach contents stay in the stomach longer, creating more pressure and more problems. And that pressure then pushes up against the valve at the top of the stomach, which can then create some refluxing issues. So stomach acid is incredibly important for several different things: protein digestion, immune function, downstream digestive dysfunction, and the microbiome health of our colon. And low stomach acid can interfere with all of those and significantly compromise multiple aspects of our health. So let's talk about why this happens in the first place. And in this segment, we're going to be breaking down the key components of the stomach that help to regulate acid reflux, in addition to some of the key triggers that actually promote it. So at the heart of this topic is a small but very powerful structure called the lower esophageal sphincter, or the LES. Now, we talked about the pyloric sphincter is on the lower part of the stomach. The LES is the muscle between the esophagus and the stomach. When we swallow, that muscle opens and allows the contents that we just swallowed to move into the stomach, and then it's supposed to seal back up again. When the lower esophageal sphincter becomes weak or loose, it doesn't do a good job of keeping the stomach contents in the stomach, allowing stomach contents like acid to reflux up and come in contact with the esophageal tissue, which is not designed to be protected against acid. So having good lower esophageal sphincter tone and good muscle function is a key component of controlling reflux. And very counterintuitively, one of the things that creates very good muscle tone on the lower esophageal sphincter is stomach acid. People with higher stomach acidity tend to have a stronger lower esophageal sphincter than people with low stomach acid. And we see this play out across the population. We know by studying people across broad age groups that stomach acidity tends to be higher in younger individuals than older individuals. However, we all know that acid reflux symptoms tend to occur more in older people than in younger people. without some exceptions, we don't see a lot of acid reflux in teenagers and people in their, young 20s. When they have really high stomach acidity, we see it more in older people. Now, there's multiple factors associated with that, but part of it is theorized to be that as the stomach acidity lowers, we lose that muscle tone and are more susceptible to reflux problems. And I've had many patients in the clinic actually reverse their acid reflux with doing nothing else but increasing their stomach acidity, which is totally off from what you're actually told and the general dogma around what people are supposed to do to help relieve acid reflux symptoms. But we're going to unpack that a lot in later videos, so stay tuned. Now, reflux can also be a pressure problem, right? We can have things like overeating. If we create too much pressure, we're pushing against that valve, and that valve can only withstand so much. Like I said, things like overeating or gas buildup from sloppy digestion or eating the wrong foods. Hiatal hernias are a major topic around this issue, but not as problematic as you may think. I have so many patients come in and tell me, Dr. Passero, I has acid reflux. I'm always going to have it because the doctor did a scan and they said I have a hiatal hernia. Over 90% of those patients end up with no acid reflux when they follow the right steps. Hiatal hernias can contribute to dysfunction that makes you more prone to acid reflux. But if you have a hiatal hernia, I can promise you that you are not destined to have reflux for the rest of your life, and you can fix it by following the steps we're going to outline. Some people with very severe hiatal hernias, there is a mechanical issue that's a problem, but if you have it, do not fret. For most people, there is a solution. Tight clothing can be an issue. People that are constantly wearing things very tight around the abdomen can increase that pressure. And one thing that you may not have thought of is constipation. If things aren't flowing out, things can't flow through. And if the movement in the upper GI system is inhibited because there's lack of movement in the lower digestive system, you get that backlog of pressure and increases in reflux. And I've had many patients where we've been able to completely solve their reflux issues by doing nothing else than helping the lower GI move more freely, more regularly, and we relieve their constipation. So those are things you may not have heard of. Now, other things like stomach irritation and inflammation, there are certain things that just can irritate the stomach. And if the stomach gets a little wound on it and that acid ends up touching that wound, because the cells are damaged, they don't function properly in creating that protective coating. So if acid touches sort of like an open sore on the stomach, it causes the stomach to spasm. And when it spasms like that, it just overwhelms the lower esophageal sphincter with pressure, and you get that acid refluxing up. So calming down stomach inflammation is a major component of relieving reflux symptoms. Then, of course, there's the stress and nervous system, or stress and its effects on the nervous system. And that has multiple aspects of how it contributes to reflux. One is that high levels of stress hormones like cortisol for extended periods of time, we know suppress the other chemicals in our body that help our esophagus and stomach to produce that protective coating that sort of helps to guard us from acid. In addition, the increased stress hormone slows down digestion, which also increases that pressure. So we always hear that association between high stress levels and stomach problems, right? And that's the mechanisms why it reduces our protective mechanisms, and it also creates increased amount of pressure. If we're getting to these issues, why is it that reflux symptoms keep coming back? Well, if you just neutralize the acid, the symptoms can improve, but you're not fixing the root cause or fixing the system and how it actually functions. See, the valve dysfunction is still present, the inflammation is still present, and the pressure issues may still be present. So we really need to understand the key aspects in order to understand how to fix these issues. So if reflux isn't just about the acid, then how do we fix it? In the next video, I'm going to start walking you through some of the things that I've considered to be the most effective solutions for helping people relieve their acid reflux that I've worked out over my 20 years of practice. We're going to talk about diet, but not the dietary things that you've heard of before. We're going to talk about the digestive function and how to optimize digestive function and look for and detect microbial imbalances. We're going to talk about lifestyle patterns that are critical and key for improving how your digestive system functions, which is a key part of relieving reflux. And we're going to talk about ways in which we can heal the damaged tissue to create a balanced system in general. So we heal the system, we restore function to the system, and we implement the right lifestyle and dietary patterns that keep the system balanced on an ongoing basis. So if you've been struggling with acid reflux, I want you to understand something. Your body is not broken. Your body is trying to tell you something incredibly important. And if we listen and we understand what your body is trying to tell you, we can actually start to fix the issue at the root cause. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in my next video.